I couldn't stand it. I was resetting. I put I made the mistake when I was putting my quilt on the frame of doing it the opposite way. And so I redid it and set it on my quilt frame properly. And then I took my great big huge Sharpie marker and I put top on one rail and backing and batting on the other. So that so I know what I'm doing in the future. It's been a rough week, folks. I'm really sorry about that. But the truth is it's always a rough week for me. Novembrance Day week. It's the week my dad died. It's Remembrance Day. It's the lull between Thanksgiving and Christmas for us here in Canada. So anyway, here we go. We're going to start over because my grandson phoned and, well, grandchildren take precedence over live readings. When I could do the live readings later and my grandson, well, I don't always get my chance. I can only talk to him twice every 2 weeks, right? Okay, wrong glasses. Now, if you are with our Half Acre Homestead, you let me know if you want a quilt. Jeez and crackers. If you want a quilt this afternoon or if you want to sew. It's up to you guys. But I got to know so I can set up. Hey, creation. Reese, barefoot chickens. All right, here we go. Christie by Catherine Marshall, chapter 13. And it's a long one, but we'll get there. My new life was a stretching process all the way. I had thought of myself as shy, not naturally a leader, and Miss Alice saw this tendency to draw into myself and would have none of it. But Miss Alice was not one to dissipate energy in theorizing. Rather, she was that rare combination, an idealist who could deal in specifics. So her first dictum, designed to force me out of my reserve, was her insistence that I visit the family of each of my school children in their homes. Oh, you're pushing me, Gina. You're pushing me. Since I was already overwhelmed with schoolwork, at first the visiting looked like an impossible task. Still, I knew that Miss Alice was right to ask this of me. Knowing children at school and could never substitute for seeing the settings for myself, their settings for myself, and more I realized what a far step it was from the Huddleston family home on Montfort Avenue in Asheville to these mountain cabins. But then I wondered how I could make these calls more than a perfunctory gesture on the part of the new teacher. For there was a wall of reserve around the mountain people, not easy to penetrate. Friends were not made quickly in these parts. I had yet to see any glad handing or backslapping or the making of small talk for the stranger in Cutter Gap. How often I already had struggled with this situation. The amount of cool, unhurried courtesy as the Highlander held his hands quietly at his sides while his eyes, with a glint of curiosity and humor, appraised me, the outlander. He was forming no hasty judgments, but neither was any least effort being made to impress me. If the mountain man or woman had nothing to say he considered worth saying, then he said nothing. Sometimes I would squirm uncomfortably at this and strain to fill the silence with talk, because I sensed that the Highlander silence was more than shyness. There was too much composure along with the diffidence. I kept wondering how long it would be to take the Cutter Gap folk to stop thinking of me as a foreigner. Probably a generation, easily. When we first moved to Apsley, we had lived in Toronto. And everybody was polite and everybody was nice. But if it weren't for the Tuckers, we'd have been strangers our whole life there, right? Their Tuckers were our neighbors, and they literally kind of took us in as neighbors. And it was, they were the first ones there when my dad died. Their son Wally, my best friend's younger brother, was the EMT. You know what I mean? Well, other than my sister and her husband being the first one there. So it takes sometimes, like, I remember we were 15 years up there. Dad was 15 years up there. And then one day I went with him to town, and people were nodding at him or waving. 15 years. I kept wondering how long it would take the Cutter Gap folk to stop thinking of me as a foreigner. And that little town of Apsley was not remote by any stretch of the imagination. Perhaps years and years. Not until I got married and had reared children and grandchildren. I wondered if there was anything I could do to be accepted. Plunge in, I supposed. So I decided to make my first call on Ruby May's parents. Her relationship with them was not of the best. Perhaps I could be an intermediary. The Morrison cabin on the other side of Cold Springs Mountain looked no different from most, except that the cornfield back of the house was tilted at a 40-degree angle. It strained my imagination to picture a man pushing a bull-tongue plow up that hillside. An old man and a much younger woman were sitting idly on the porch. "Hello," I began, more heartily than I felt. "I'm Christie Huddleston, the new teacher at the mission." The old man had his feet on the railing, long white beard sunk on his chest. "Howdy." The feet didn't move. The woman said nothing, sat staring at me. I was still standing on the top step. The old man must be Ruby May's grandfather, I decided. "Is Mr. Morrison at home?" There was no answer. My words might have well been dropped into a bottomless hole. Finally, they struck bottom. "I'm Duggan Morrison." "You're Ruby May's stepfather?" "Aye." "I'm glad to meet you, Mr. Morrison. Ruby May is... I've gotten to know your daughter well." The old man's eyes were on the scenery. He lifted his feet off the railing, leaned forward, and let go a stream of tobacco juice. Fortunately, the spittle missed the long white beard. "Set in chair over yan," he volunteered, relaxing back into his own. I picked up the chair and set it beside the woman. She was barefooted and had coarse features with hard lines in her face. Her eyes were like steel balls, so calculating that I could not tell their color. "You Mrs. Morrison?" "Yep." "These people are taciturn and I'm shy, so what are we going to do? Sit here now and stare straight ahead? When two walls meet head on, something has to give. I suppose I'm the one to make the supreme effort." "Mr. Morrison," my voice sounded too loud in my own ears. So I cleared my throat and began more softly. "Your daughter is unhappy because you have asked her to leave home. She'd like to be let bygones be bygones." "Which?" "She wants you to forgive her and let her come home." "She's stiff-necked, needs to be tucked down a peg." "But I think you'll find Ruby May different now," I said eagerly. "Won't you talk to her?" He appeared not to have heard me. "Wouldn't mind her ma here, so I locked her in the smokehouse. Ornery young'un." "Well," I said lamely, "it would be nice if you and Ruby May could get back together." No reply. I tried another direction. "Mrs. Morrison, have you seen our new school building?" "No." "I hope you'll look in on us sometime." "Well..." "How about you, Mr. Morrison? Come and see us at the mission house. We'd be happy to have you." "The which? Oh, I don't go round no church houses. That's for the women." I thought about that a moment and then plunged ahead recklessly. "Mr. Morrison, every church I have ever been in has been run by men. The church doesn't mean anything in a community unless the men are part of it. We have a wonderful man named David Grantlin in our mission. I think you'd like to meet him." "Don't take no stock in broughton on city folk fella coming here, a-telling us how to live." Heated words leapt to my tongue. I managed to stop them just in time. It was no use. These people were suspicious of me. I could not say anything right. As a caller, I was a catastrophe. I rose, but they still did not move from their chairs. It was nice to meet you. Well, goodbye. And I got away from there as quickly as I could. Of course, the visiting was easier when David went with me. Most of the folks knew him by now and responded to his liking for people generally, and his easy way with them. David offered to go along on my first official visit to the Spencer cabin since he was afraid I would never find it on the backside of Lonesome Pine Ridge. And he was probably right. There was such a warm touch of spring in the air this last week of March that I suggested to Dave that we walk instead of ride. The evergreens were tipped with vivid green, and the willows were overhanging the streams, were a whisper of green lace. Here and there in the fields of the valley, spicewood brushes waved yellow plumes. It was spring, and I felt light and carefree. Nor did I think spicewood bushes, I think they might have been forsythia, the yellow flowers, the first in spring. Nor did I fear being tongue-tied with the Spencers as I had with the Morrisons. As we reached the top of the ridge, I realized that I never would have recognized this as the same cabin into which Pentland and I had crept for shelter from the howling wind and the stinging cold during the first trek of El Peno to Gutter Gap. In the charm of the sunlit cabin, it was hard to recapture the eerie quality of that day of Bob Allen's brain operation. For there was charm here. It was in sight, which must have been chosen carefully by someone a long time ago. It felt almost on top of the world. I was standing now on one of those peaks to which I lifted my eyes every morning and every evening from my bedroom window. Here, with the silent gaze of the mountains upon us, trivialities and pettiness and meanness faded and dropped out of sight. All around us were the rich colors of sun-baked earth and pine and spruce and balsam. A clean, cool quality of the woods and of the mountainsides where spring was burgeoning and had crept indoors. Entering the cabin was like sticking one's nose into one of those souvenir pillows filled with balsam needles or cedar chips they made for the tourists back home in Asheville. Fairlight Spencer had arranged Galax leaves in 2 old pewter bowls, the leaves mostly bronze and wintry red from the winter, and here and there new green. In a chipped cup she had put trillium and violets. The very first, she told us, and unselfconsciously reached out the slender fingers to caress the flowers, the least ones of springtime, meaning the youngest. The grace of the gesture and the long tapering fingers, even though they were red and rough with chipped and broken nails, caught my attention. I stood there thinking that these should be the hands of a lady handling an ivory fan or smoothing her skirts of velvet or satin. They were the hands of an aristocrat, and here they were on a mountain woman, buried in the back of beyond. Nor could I see in this woman any trace of that shrinking Fairlight rigid with fear, who had stood beside me watching the sun sink behind the far peaks while the operation went on inside the cabin. Today she was eager to show me everything, including an unusual quilt stretched on a quilting frame near the hearth. So while David was talking with 15-year-old John, teasing him, rumpling his hair, I was examining the quilt. It was not the commonplace hit-and-miss patchwork, but a moon and star motif. When I asked Mrs. Spencer about it, she pointed to a small window set high in the wall to the right of the fireplace. You see that lookout? I get a heap of joy from that. When I'm lonesome like, it perks me up to look up there and see the sunball or the moon and stars. So thrice one night I drawed me an idea. 3 picture pretties, one of the moon and a star. I looked at her in astonishment. Mrs. Spencer, you mean you drew a picture of the new moon at 3 different positions and then copied it onto your quilt? I love Fairlight Spencer. She nodded. Weren't much work. Seems right nice to have the starry heavens on my counterpin. Mama aims to make me a counterpin after a spell. It was Clara's voice. She and Zadie had just come into the room carrying heaping plates of gingerbread. David grabbed a piece as it went past, and the girls giggled, delighted at his eagerness. Say, this is good. Tastes different. What's in it? He asked. Made out of sorghum and wheaten flour, Zadie explained. And then John brought in a cedar pail filled with roasted chestnuts. And when their father appeared in an antique-looking musical instrument under his arm, I knew this was to be a real party, which the Spencers had been planning for days. There would be no sitting and staring silently and answering in monosyllables here. Mr. Spencer, howdy do, ma'am, to me was so courtly that it could have been a bow to one's sovereign or the opening of a performance on stage. Howdy, preacher. He shook David's hand vigorously. How's the steeple making and the road building? Coming along, Jeb. Much too slow to suit me, though, and now I've got to knock off on the steeple for a while to bring telephone wire. Say, Jeb, how about giving me a hand with the wire stringing? I been thinking I thought to lend you a hand with something. Truth is, I'd kinder like to speak into that newfangled contraption myself. This was the first chance to really know Jeb Spencer. Blonde, debonair, lively too, as I realized from the moment he began plying the goose quill back and forth across the strings of a dulcimer. Yes, that was it. One of the old-time dulcimers Miss Alice had described to me. Oh, as I went down to Derby town, all on a summer's day, it's there I saw the finest ram that was ever fed on hay. Oh, the wool upon this ram's back was drugged to the ground, and I hauled it to the market, and it weighed 10,000 pounds. Something about Mr. Spencer's exuberance must have made the girls feel that their father was of a real song-singing ballad mind, as they would have expressed it, because they were squealing with delight. John would have no part in girlish giggling, but I noticed that his eyes were glowing as he coiled his big frame and settled down beside his father. This dulcimer had 4 strings, shaped differently from a guitar, with a slender waist and heart-shaped holes. The tone was clear, flute-like, with a plaintive quality. It would never take the place of the fiddle or foot-tapping rhythms, but already I could see it was the perfect accompaniment for half-singing, half-talking ballads. Oh, rise you up, every 7 brethrens, and bring your sister down. It never shall be said that a Stuart's son had taken her out of town. He mounted her on a milk-white steed. He rode a dapple gray, and swung the bugle horn about his neck, and so went blowing away. As the story of Earl Brand went on for 8 verses, 12, 16, it was like a door opening for me. It was ushered into a new land with the assortment of new images and ideas coming in. I realized that in these cabins there were few, if any, books. The tales handed down by word of mouth through ballads and tall tales must have been the only substitute for storybooks. I'd only to look at the eager faces of the Spencer children fastened on their father to see how hungry they were for stories. And as for the music, I thought of how hard my parents had tried to give me some appreciation for good music. Yet somehow I could not depreciate the homespun minstrelsy I was hearing now. I sat there thinking about how all real music was born in the human spirit. Well, these ballads surely had been. There was something childlike and basic about them, an absence of sham or pretense, and the something else even behind that, some rare race knowledge. Listening to them was like looking into the exposed hearts of folks everywhere, of all of us with our common heritage on both sides of the Atlantic. Jeb Spencer was enjoying himself, relishing the enthusiastic reaction of his audience as he watched the witchery of old tales reach out and capture David and me along with his family. Effortlessly, the ballads recreated the atmosphere of other centuries for us. Snow-white steeds and dapple grays, bugle horns and broadswords, fair maidens at casement windows listening for the beat of a horse's hooves on the wild moor, castles and porters and peel towers of the border country between England and Scotland. Now to these had been added the buffalo hollows and the Indians of the American frontier. Horses and buggies, beds, quilts, and rocking chairs, cornbread and biscuits. Raccoons and possums and mules, and always there seemed to be plenty of blood flowing, of men being hanged. But then the ballads were honest about that too, for life in 17th and 18th century Britain and on the American frontier later on must have always had its gory side. Suddenly David injected a note. Now I'll match you with one of the latest hit tunes. I wish I'd brought my ukulele. I'll sing it once, Jeb, then you can pick it up. You tell her I stutter. Oh, a foolery song, Clara enthused. And soon the children were tapping and pretending to stutter the words along with David. He went on from that one to Swinging Down the Lane, and then one of his favorites, Under the Yum Yum Tree. That's the yummiest place to be. Then the impromptu concert ended, and with Jeb singing a song that was going to haunt me forever. Down in the valley so low, hang your head over, hear the wind blow. Hear the wind blow, love. Hear the wind blow. Hang my head over. Hear the wind blow. How is it that sometimes a melody and a lyric will wing their way into mind and heart to lodge there like a hummingbird? Here in these astringent lines, someone had captured what I felt so deeply, especially about the plight of the mountain women. Excuse me. My eyes were watering a bit there. I haven't been blinking enough. There was something about Fairlight Spencer that brought my feelings about them into focus. As David and I were leaving, Mrs. Spencer sought me out timidly, tugging at my sleeve. Miss Christie, could I speak with you? She pulled me away from the others to the far corner of the room. Look-a-here, you've never handled a school afore. That's a heap of young ones for one gal woman. Is there anything I can do to help, like clean up the school yarn? I'm good hand to work, or wash some of your go-to-meeting clothes. It's my turn to favor you now. The words were spoken with such gentle dignity, as if a parting gift were being bestowed on me, as was indeed the case. Here was a mountain woman with a husband and 5 children to care for, living in such poverty that if she had any shoes, she was saving them to be worn outside the house. Yet thinking of me, even as I started to answer, I realized something else. There was more to this gracious offer than met the eye. Fairlight Spencer was not just volunteering to do some washing and ironing for me. She was also holding out to me the gift of her friendship. Among the mountain people, this was the most cherished gift of all. It was a breakthrough of those walls of reserve that had been so far seemed impenetrable. Mrs. Spencer, that's the nicest offer anyone has made me since I left home. You're right. 67 children are a handful, and I do need help. I paused, groping for words that had no condescension in them. I'll accept your wonderful offer if you'll let me be your friend. You see, Miss Spencer, I'm a long way from home. Sometimes I get lonesome for another woman to talk to, and maybe there'll be something I can do for you too. The face that in repose could look so Spartan and pioneer was now wreathed in smiles. Aye, you can help, Miss Christie. Suddenly she was shy again, her voice sinking almost to a whisper. I can't read nor write. Would you learn me how? I'd like that. The eagerness in her voice added such pathos that at that moment I wanted to teach the woman to read more than I ever wanted to do anything before. I'd love doing that, Mrs. Spencer. Could you come down to the mission house maybe Saturday? For sure and certain I'll be there, she said joyously. Oh, and would you handle my front name? Fairlight. Okay. Only a page and a half left, folks. On the way back to the mission, I was so gratified by the success of the afternoon that it was all I could do to keep from skipping along. David sensed my lightheartedness and began out to whistle a tune. Spotting a pink flower ahead, I forgot my resolution about acting more grown up with David, and I ran over to pluck it. There was an aromatic scent. Oh, frick. There was an aromatic scent. Impulsively, I thrust it under David's nose. What's that smell like, David? Shook his head. I can't tell. I studied him for a moment. He seemed a little preoccupied, and I didn't want him to think I was a giddy little flirt. I threw the wild geranium to one side and walked on beside him quietly. Why so solemn? David finally asked. I get annoyed with myself sometimes, especially when I act like a little girl. But I like you that way. What way? Little girl-like. You seem so natural and uncomplicated. You talk as if I were your little sister. David stopped and looked at me sternly. That's a lot of nonsense. You have more maturity than a lot of older girls I know. Do you know a lot of girls, David? A few. Have you been in love with any of them? David considered the question for a moment in silence. I'm not sure. There was one who was rather special for a while, but she would never have been interested in this kind of life. What was she like? Dark-haired, quite good-looking, rather reserved, and I'm afraid her family had too much money. David, do men like girls to be, well, reserved and a little shy? When David looked at me quizzically, I rushed to clarify. What I'm trying to get at, David, is that we're all taught to be modest and not too talkative and not too forward and all that sort of thing. Sometimes I feel like a hypocrite and sometimes just plain stupid when I try to act demure. Well, then be yourself. All right, I will. But there will be some people who won't understand and who will think I'm being too aggressive. Why, I even got into trouble with Miss Alice just with my little letter writing. You see, David, there are so many things I see and feel and want to do something about. And then when I rush ahead, I suddenly feel like I'm being a fool. But there's a difference between the kind of ideas you get and the way some aggressive women I know want to run other people's lives. One thing is sure, David, the women around here will never be like that. How do you mean? Well, it's almost as though they aren't people. I mean, the hard life they have, so much work, and the way the men here sort of use them and dismiss them. David let his hand fall on my shoulder for a moment while he stopped to consider this blast. Christie, you're full of fire, aren't you? Why, I can see you marching down the street as one of those suffragettes with a sign saying, women have rights, but I wouldn't try it in the Cove, or at least not for a while. He let his hand slide off my shoulder, I thought, almost reluctantly. I felt secure and, yes, exhilarated walking beside him. Thank you for joining me for Christie by Catherine Marshall, Chapter 13. We'll come back as soon as I can with Chapter 14. Take care. God bless. And know that this is added to a full playlist so that you can, if you haven't been here before or you missed some of this, you can go back and re-listen the first 13, all of the 13 chapters in a playlist. All right? Take care. God bless. And we'll see you again soon.